Okay, good morning. I'll call the meeting to order. I'll begin by acknowledging we are in Treaty 1 territory and traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Neil Hart and I'm chairing today's panel. With me is Linda McFadden to my left and Brent McIntyre to my far left. The assessor today is Ryan Valderrama and the recording secretary is Karen Belshaw. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application and will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that the applicants or assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, where the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the public record. So can you be sworn in, Karen, please?
Please state your name.
Ryan Valderrama.
Do you swear the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Thank you.
Please state your name.
Mark Newman.
Do you swear the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please
Bradford Scott Boardroom.
Do you swear the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, the first property on the agenda today is 1700 Quarries. So you may proceed, Mr. Newman. Sorry, I'm ahead of my time again. You can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First property, the docket has a file number 19-4118. Has a roll number of 07-000-954-000. It is located at 1700 Portage Avenue. We're dealing with the roll year of 2020, using reference date of April 1st, 2018. The assessed value for the property is $4,443,000. It is an institutional property with a liability of a taxable school tax exempt. It has 2 stories, 1 section, an effective year built of 1996, a construction classic masonry bearing walls with an average wall height of 13 feet. The zone is C2 with a land area of 39,554 square feet, a planned area of 10,877 square feet, basement area of 4,132 square feet, and a gross floor area of 25,886 square feet. It also has a leasable area of 19,000 square feet. On page 3 are a couple of aerial photos of the subject property. And on page 4 are some land sale comparables. They're varying or ranging from $13.92 up to $43.96 sale price per square foot. And right below it is the map of the subject property and comparable land sales within the city. On page 5 is the cost methodology summary. The land valuation has a classification and liability of 40S, and it has a net area of 39,554 square feet, a net rate of $19.87 per square foot, which is model-driven rate. And on the next section We have land and building. The land was already assessed or was mentioned at $19.87, giving it a land value of $786,000. Next portion is the building section. Has $3,657,000. It is also taxable, no school or school tax exempt under the Municipal Assessment Act 23(1)D. And the summary, the land and building summary, the land value is at $786,000. The building value is at $3,657,000, giving it a total value under cost methodology of $4,443,000. On page 6 is the zoning of the property and some Municipal Assessment Act and some Public Schools Act, Education Administration Act excerpts, beginning page 7, and some examples of schools, beginning page 11. And that's my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Okay, now, Mr. Newman, you can talk if you have any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Valderrama, looking at your brief, starting at page 11 and continuing through to page 17, this is a list of public schools, correct?
Yes, these are examples of schools, yes.
But public schools.
Public schools, yes, correct.
The subject property is occupied by a vocational school, and that's why it's school tax exempt, correct?
Correct.
Do you know the history of this property? Do you know that for 30 or 40 years this property was occupied by Manitoba Infrastructure and Transportation?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Are you aware that when the vocational school came to occupy the space in approximately 2016, that caused a supplementary assessment to issue? Are you aware of that?
2016. I'm not particularly sure of the date, but yes, it was supplemented to become Herzing, or to be occupied by the current occupier.
Okay. And that's, the date is not particularly germane, but you're aware, I take it, that when the supplementary was done, because of the occupation by Herzing, it was done on an income approach?
No, I wasn't aware of that. I was aware that it was a school, and back then it might have been under income. However, upon reassessment, we determined that it should have been under cost.
Okay. And why did you determine that it should be done on a cost basis?
Simply, it is an institutional school, to be particular.
So is it your evidence that all schools, all vocational schools are valued on a cost basis?
As far as I'm aware, all schools are valued under cost approach.
Was it done on a cost basis because it's a vocational school, or was it done on a cost basis because the department did both an income value and a cost value, and because the cost value came out higher, that's why it was done on a cost basis?
No, not because it was higher under the cost approach, but it is because it should be under cost approach.
I see. And if I were to suggest to you that I'm aware of a number of examples of schools, vocational schools, that are done on an income approach, would that surprise you?
It won't surprise me because there's so much of them, so I'm not sure if...
The subject property, you're aware it's subject to a lease? There's a lease in place?
Yes, correct.
And you're aware, therefore, that because there's a lease in place, the property would be tradable in the market based on that lease in place?
I'm not sure about being tradable at that rate or at that income. No, I'm not sure. I can't speak of...
Would you agree with me that generally the cost approach is used for special purpose buildings that do not trade in the marketplace?
I would agree with that.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
No, I have have no further questions.
Rims?
I have no questions.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Mr. Moon, the question you on why the cost approach.
Yes, sir.
So I have no further questions on that. So
Yes, sir.
you can proceed with your presentation, Mr. Moon.
Thank you. So what I will do is I'll start by walking you through my tabs, my attachments. And tab 1 is the income-based calculation prepared by the assessment department. Mr. Valderrama was good enough to provide this to me. And it reflects a value of $3,347,000. To be clear, I don't agree with that value, but my point simply is that the department does calculate an income-based approach for this property, and this is the approach, using a rate of $13.16 per square foot, 5.5% vacancy, 2% other expenses, $7 shortfall, and a 6.7% capitalization rate. The history of this property is that, and if you turn to the next page of tab 1, you can see some overhead photos. And you can see the red teardrop pointing to 1700 Portage, which is adjacent to the St. James Expressway. The history of this property is that for 30 or 40 years it was leased to the province of Manitoba, Infrastructure and Transport. I have been doing this property for many, many years. The property has always been valued on the income approach historically. And when Herzing came to occupy the space in approximately 2015, the approach done on the supplementary was also an income approach, and it was the subject of an appeal, and the end result of that appeal for 2018 was to set the value at $2,274,000. For 2020, we now have a value that is essentially doubled, and the reason it has doubled is because the department has chosen to utilize a cost approach, even though they have also done an income approach. And you'll note that I asked the assessor about other vocational schools that are valued on an income approach and other school properties that are valued on an income approach. If you look at my tab number 3, that is the building located at 265 Notre Dame, which is occupied by Robertson Career College. That is the questionnaire, which is on the following pages. It is the income and expense statement, and at page 16 in the lower right-hand corner is the rent roll that was submitted as part of the 2020 appeal. And you can see that Robertson College is the sole and only tenant of this premise. And I can tell you that this premise is valued on an income approach basis. And indeed, I have, as part of some rebuttal that I will file, and maybe I should just hand it out now. It might just be simplest. And then I'll speak to it now as well. There are 7 pages in this package. If you go to page 6, this is the first page of the assessor's brief for the 2020 appeal. And you can see that the majority of the property is school tax exempt. The portion that is not school tax exempt is a parking lot. And then if you go to the very last page in this rebuttal package, you can see the income-based workup for this property and the rents that are used. And this is an example of a vocational school which is subject to a lease and is tenanted and has been valued on the income approach. The other parts of this rebuttal that I've given you, and I'll just speak to it now since you have it in hand, are some excerpts from the appraisal of real estate, third Canadian edition. Page 2 is the beginning of the chapter that deals with the cost approach. Page 3 in the lower right-hand corner, if you go down to the bottom, there's a heading, Applicability and Limitations. And it says there, and I put an arrow beside it, the cost approach is particularly important when a lack of market activity limits the usefulness of the direct comparison approach, and when the property to be appraised is not amenable to valuation by the income approach. And if you go to the next page, page 4 in the lower right-hand corner, and again I put in the left margin a line and then some underlining. The cost approach may be used to develop an opinion of market value and is frequently applied to proposed construction, special purpose or specialty properties, and other properties that are not frequently exchanged in the market, such as public buildings. And I will readily acknowledge that public schools, which is the list the assessor has attached, do not typically trade in the marketplace, and that is why I think typically they are done on a cost basis. However, the subject property is different. It has a lease in place, which I'm going to get into in more detail in a couple of moments. And because it has a lease in place, it is no different than the property at 35 King 265 Notre Dame that I showed you as part of the rebuttal that has been valued on an income approach basis. And as I said to you, I believe the assessor has valued this on a cost approach basis because it results in a higher value than the income basis. But you can see that the assessor also prepared an income-based valuation, which reflects a value of $3,347,000, which I don't agree with for reasons which I'll discuss further in a moment. Then at tab 2, tab 2 is a variety of excerpts from the lease. I can tell you this is not the first time the assessor is seeing these excerpts. This very same package that you see here was part of my brief for the 2018 appeal. And so there's 19,000 square feet with a commencement date of January 1 of 2015. It's a 10-year lease. The rent, if you go to what's page 11 in the lower right-hand corner, the rent steps up over the course of the lease. It's initially $19.20. It's been cut off a little bit, but then it jumps up to $20.02, and then it jumps up to $20.80 in the last couple of years of the lease. So in the time frame July 1/17 to December 31 of 19, the rent is $20.02, but that's a gross rent. And I'll have more to say about that as I turn the pages. If you go to the next page, page 12, you can see that you've got a provision that makes 2015 the base year for taxes. You can see there's a provision that makes 2015 the base year for operating costs. If you go to page 13, section 3.07 of the lease, janitorial and garbage, that was the landlord's responsibility to pay for all of that, so that was included in the gross rent as well. If you go to page 14, in the lower right-hand corner, section 5.01, utilities were part of operating costs, and the landlord paid for all of that. Again, just speaking to the fact that it's a gross lease. And then over onto page 15, page 15 and section 15 at the bottom, the definition of operating expenses, which again are paid by the landlord in this case because it's a gross lease. And then finally, if you turn to page 19, Schedule D, these were the cleaning specifications which the landlord was obligated to meet as part of its obligation to pay for the cleaning. As it turned out, amendments were done to the lease, and the cleaning obligation was removed from the landlord, but I'll speak to that in a couple of moments when I get to what the net rent really is in relation to this space. Tab 3, I've spoken about a little bit already. It's excerpts from the assessor's brief for 2020, which now has added to it pages 6 and 7 of my rebuttal, which show that this was calculated on an income basis. And it's the same circumstance as the subject property. It's an entire building occupied by a vocational school that is valued on the income approach. Tab 4 is there for two reasons. Tab 4 is the rent roll for a building known as 491 Portage. It's there for two reasons. One, I'm going to use it as a comparison for rents. 491 Portage is the building that is on the north side of Portage beside the University of Winnipeg. The bus depot used to be in behind it. It was at one time called the Rice Building. This building is substantially occupied by the University of Winnipeg and the University of Brandon. There are rents here in the $11 per square foot range. There are rents at $9.50 a square foot. 2 points to be taken from this. One, a comparison of rents. I'll come back to that. Secondly, however, this building, which is substantially occupied by the University of Winnipeg and the University of Brandon, is valued on an income approach and not on cost approach. Then my tab 5, and this really relates to the capitalization rate. In the assessor's income approach, which is tab 1, the assessor used a capitalization rate of 6.7%. If we go to, actually just jump ahead for a moment to tab 6. Tab 6, the first page, is the assessor's capitalization rate chart from 2018. And the top section is office buildings. What I want you to note about that, this is a suburban office building. In fact, it's classified in the assessor's income approach as an OFS. So it's a suburban building, and I want you to note that the capitalization rates for suburban A and suburban B buildings in 2018 under the city's approach were as high as 8.5%, but also CBRE 7.5% was the high, Colliers 7.25% was the high, and then if you go to page 2 of tab 6, that's the city's capitalization rate chart for 2020, and again you can see that suburban B buildings have a top rate, a high rate of 9.05%, 7.3% at the 80th percentile, 7.25% says Colliers, CBRE says 7.5%, and Cushman says 7.5%. Why do I tell you all this? I tell you all this because now let's come back to tab 5, because I want to make a distinction between an A building, a B building, and the subject. So tab 5, that's a picture of 1661 Portage, which by coincidence is directly across the street from the subject property. This is an example of a Class A suburban office building. What makes it a Class A building is the quality of the amenities. It's got a number of elevators. It's got 3 elevators. It's got some underground parking. It's got climate-controlled zones. It's got a reception security desk in the elevator lobby. This is a Class A office building. And if you turn the pages, you can see an overhead photo of the subject property as well. If you then go to, I guess it's the pages are numbered 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in the lower right-hand corner. You come to another building. This is 1781 Wellington. This is on the corner of King Edward and Wellington. The Hilton Hotel is part of this complex. This is an example of a building that classifies itself as a B-class suburban office building, and the difference primarily is the quality of the amenities. And if you look at page 14 in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that I've circled it, and there's an arrow there, that this is detailed as a Class B office building. The subject, I'll suggest to you, is not a Class A or a Class B suburban building. That means its capitalization rate should be at the higher end of the range. And ultimately, if you go to tab 7 now, you can see my calculation of value, and you can see that I have used an $11 rent. I'll come back to that. I've used a 7% vacancy, $7 shortfall, 5% non-recoverables. I'll come back to the non-recoverable issue. And ultimately, I've used a 7.3% capitalization rate, which sets the value at $2,348,000 compared to the 2018 value of $2,274,000. So, what are you going to have to decide in the context of hearing this matter? Can we go now, please, to the text of my brief? You're going to have to decide which methodology to use, cost or income. And I say to you that because there's a lease in place in this property is no different than 265 Notre Dame. This property is no different than 491 Portage. There's another building at 930 Jefferson. Mr. Harden, you'll remember that building occupied by the Seven Oaks School Division as part of that complex. Also has a school tax exemption, but the complex is valued on the income approach. I'm saying to you, in the appraisal of real estate supports the concept, this is not a special purpose building. This building has a lease in place. This building will readily trade in the marketplace, valued on the income approach. I also say to you that if the assessor sets the value on the income approach at $3,347,000, I accept the income approach, but I don't accept that value. Would any buyer, remember the test, willing buyer, willing seller in the open market at April 1 of 2018, would any buyer pay $4,443,000 for this property when it's valued on the income approach at $3,347,000? I think the answer is no. Why would anybody ever pay that much? If the cost approach is coming in higher, to me that means that the obsolescence factors, economic, functional, and are not being properly recognized in the cost approach. So staying with my text, so the first decision you have to make is methodology, and of course I'm urging upon you that you should use the income approach. If we go now to page 2, I've got a summary of some of the terms of the lease. I've really walked through this already, but I'm telling you that the rates were $19.25, $20.02, and $20.82 gross based on the step-ups. Then you've got the rental rate, you've got the operating costs base year at 2015, you've got the taxes, you've got the utilities, all of which are paid for by the landlord. And then at the top of page 3, you've got the calculation of what these operating costs, taxes, and utilities come to. They total $7.42, and if you subtracted $7.42, you're going to get the rates down at the bottom. Remember, I told you one more thing, that initially the landlord was responsible for janitorial. They then amended the lease, and the landlord is no longer responsible to do the janitorial, but as a consequence, the tenant was given a credit of $2 a square foot. That reduced the rates, and so the rate in force now is $18.02, and if you took off the $7.42, you'd get $10.60 as the effective rent. Market rents, top of page 4. So as I told you, this building is classified by the assessor in the assessor's income calculation as an OFS. It's got offices, it's got classrooms, it's got a lunchroom, all the same things that are found at 265 Kennedy. 471 Portage has all of the same things. As I told you, 471 Portage, also known as 491 Portage, the rents range from $8.50 to $11 net. And for classroom spaces, they're $12.50 to $14.20 gross. And I say to you, based on all of the foregoing, I've used $11 a square foot, which I think is a reasonable rent. I've used, as I said to you, a 7% vacancy. I'm going to speak briefly to non-recoverables. The capitalization rate, I've explained to you already that I've used 7.3%, and I've told you that that drives a value of $2,349,000. So, non-recoverables. You've all heard it from me already, so I'm not going to repeat it in any detail, but I will just point out one thing. If you go to my tab 1, the assessor's 2% under their income approach based on an effective gross income of $236,000, is $4,726. This building has a plan area of 10,877 square feet. So just talking about roof, and this is the example I always give, the roof alone at $12 a square foot would have a cost of $130,524. If you divide that by 25 to amortize it over 25 years, that turns into $5,220 per year. That exceeds the assessor's 2% already. Never mind normal structural, never mind legal, never mind audit, never mind all the other things that make up non-recoverables. Many, many panels of this board have been granting the additional 5% non-recoverable, and I've included that in my calculation, which is found at my tab 7, and it comes out to a total of about $12,000. So I've given you lots of information. I'm suggesting to you, as I've said, a value of $2,349,000. I'll tell you just one other building, 709 Portage is a building on the corner of Portage. It's one block west of Sherbrooke. At one time, Federated Insurance was a tenant there, but so was Herzing College. The building is now fully occupied by New Directions, a social service agency. My point simply is that when Herzing College was there, substantially occupying the building, it was valued on an income approach as well, and I know because I've done the appeal of that building for a number of years. So, having said all of that, I'm asking for a value of $2,349,000, and I'm open to questions.
Okay, questions?
No questions, but I have a rebuttal. Just to rebut the income methodology. It's just a board of Manitoba Municipal Board decision regarding one school property with regard to an income versus a cost methodology approach.
Okay, since that's likely going to generate questions, let's put that off until after the panel has asked questions of Mr. Newman. If you don't have any more questions on his evaluation.
No, none at the moment.
Okay, so Lindy, any questions on Mr. Newman on the
I don't have any further questions.
And I don't have any further questions.
Actually, I don't either. So now you can present your rebuttal.
It's just a municipal board decision regarding a school property that was argued under the income approach. However, the municipal board has decided that it should be argued or valued under cost approach. Thank you. Sorry. Just the gist of it is that the property owner or the representative argued that the valuation should be under income approach. They presented an income approach to value, and our department stance is that it should be valued under cost in terms of just being assessed as a school or being used as a school.
Can you point out where in the decision it?
Yes, on page 17.
Are we missing page 18?
I think it was reversed when I looked up photocopy.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It got page 17. Just the lone sentence there. The board therefore will use the cost approach to estimate the value of the subject property. Now, it's been argued earlier that the subject property has a lease in place, and I understand the circumstances that the subject property has. However, based on the municipal board decision, the story behind it is that an income approach was also put forward in terms of valuing the property by by the appellant, and that the board has decided that it should be cost approach that should be used in terms of methodology.
Okay, is that your presentation on this?
Yes, that's the only point that I would like to make. And if Mr. Lumen has a question.
Yeah. Give him a moment to look it over.
So, yes, I do have some questions. Let's look to page 13. In the middle paragraph, it states the parties also disagreed on whether the subject property is a special purpose building. Mr. Dupuy argues the college is a special purpose building designed specifically for the user, not suitable for other uses. Mr. Benoit argued that it could be converted. So I'm pointing that out because I'm going to come to the question. Then at the top of 14 it states, however, and this is quoting from the Appraisal of Real Estate, 2nd edition, however, if the market demand for such buildings is low or non-existent, the appraiser may project a highest and best use as a conversion to commercial office space. Thus, the highest and best use of a special purpose property depends on the amount of market demand for such space. So I asked you earlier whether you were familiar with the history of the subject property and the fact that for 30 to 40 years it was occupied by the province of Manitoba, but you indicated you weren't aware of that. Okay. Then, if you go to page 15, the first full paragraph down, in general, post-secondary education properties do not exchange in the market and are occupied by a single user during the life expectancy of the property. So I had asked you about all the examples, the list of schools attached to your brief, and you confirmed that those were all public schools.
Right.
The subject property is different in the sense that it has had a different use, has been used by the province as offices, and could easily be converted back to a similar use. Agreed?
Yes, I agree.
And this was an owner-occupied property, so unlike the subject, there was not a lease in place which could be traded in the marketplace, correct?
Correct.
Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Can you vent any questions?
I have no questions.
Linda?
No questions.
I guess this gives rise to a question in my mind of Mr. Newman. On the subject property, I've been in that property when there's an MIT building. What sort of conversion was done on it, if any, when it was occupied by the college?
So when it was, I'm sorry, when occupied by the college?
By a Herzing College.
Oh, yes, okay. So what they did is, structurally nothing changed. Windows didn't change, for example. They did do a reconfiguration of the interior partitions. They created offices. They created some classroom areas. That's fundamentally what they did to it. So primarily what occurred is interior demising walls. That was the fundamental nature of the conversion that occurred.
Okay, and would that have been, say, more extensive or less extensive than what a landlord would ordinarily do for a tenant?
And my answer to you will be it would depend on the use being made by the tenant. But it's interesting that in my building, which is 360 Main Street, there is more and more a trend, and there's more and more a trend with respect to offices, to not do the demising walls, to not have as many smaller offices as there was historically, but rather now to have a lot of open areas and a lot of sharing of kiosks and desks that people work at. But it all depends on the use. So if I wanted a traditional office type space on the floor of an office building, I might have 20 offices in there, I might have 3 boardrooms, I would have a lunchroom, I would have an administrative area, there would be washrooms. All of that is similar to what is in subject property right now, but it all depends on the use. At the end of the day, the movement of interior configuring walls or demising walls is not a big deal. I mean, imagine this space. I don't know what was here before it was done up in this way, but at the end of the day, you've got exterior walls, but you've got these interior demising walls that create these 3 boardrooms, create the 2 washrooms, create the front desk area there at the front, and that's what's been done here. This could easily be converted into an alternate use. But I think, from my perspective, the most important point is the city does not value all vocational schools on a cost basis. The city, in fact, did an income approach on this property, treating it as OFS. This property has a lease in place. It's tradable in the marketplace. You or I could buy this property from the owner based on our view of the income approach.
Okay. Do you have any questions arising from...
Just a quick one. Would there be any change in the near future in terms of the use for this subject property, or no? Okay. That's all.
There's a lease in place that runs until 2025.
That's about 5 years from now. Okay. Right. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentations on this, ma'am. Okay, we will move on then to 1085 Wellington Avenue.
1075.
Oh, sorry, I'm ahead of my time. Or I'm down the street.
What is it?
1075 Wellington.
So if I might, in the interest of expediency, the only issue here is with respect to classification liability. We do not dispute the amount of the assessment on this property.
So it's class and liability that's being dispute? That puts the onus on you then. So you can proceed.
So I will start by telling you that this site originally started off as a well, before that, it started off as a school for the hearing impaired. Subsequent to that, there was an addition put on, and it was Prince Charles School. And going back to my high school days, I used to do curriculum work in that school with some of the students in there. It is now, and has been for a large number of years, been the Winnipeg School Division's Education Resource Center, and it is now known as the Prince Charles Education Resource Center. I've gone through a bit of the history of the school on our page 3. We do show some pictures on the outside, and you can on page 2, and you can see there that it is, as you typically expect to see, sort of a school of this vintage in this area. And so on page 3, you'll see an overhead shot. You can see the original structures as well as the additions made to the property. The school, as I indicated, closed. That happened in 1980. Well, it was announced in 1988 and actually closed at the end of the school year in 1989 and was subsequently consolidated. So the operations for the school division, and that's not unusual to find it in the school divisions, and I can talk to that or speak to that because we do work for all of them within the city of Winnipeg. The circumstance now is that there is a centralization of services. They don't have the individual services in every single school or location throughout the division. So in this particular location, they have consolidated their audiovisual and computer repair, and I've gone through the list on our page 4 here. That provides repairs for school division computer and AV equipment. They have an audiology department in this location which provides support and services to students. They have clinical support services, and it also has support staff for those clinicians working with the Winnipeg School Division students. There are interdivisional student services program located in this, and that's the provincially supported youth justice program component of it, and the international supporting students program as well. It's also in this location the Library Resource Center, and that provides a centralized facility for resource materials for teaching staff within the school division, and they have professional support services as well, teacher consultants and support staff for that. And so that will outline the uses of the property. I haven't included pictures, but the physical description, the current use of the property, I think, is not in dispute, if I understand correctly, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Newman, to address the issue of liability to taxation.
So because liability to taxation is an issue on a number of the properties this morning, I intend to give you an extensive submission once in relation to this, and I'll walk you carefully through a separate brief that we have prepared relating to the liability to taxation issue. And then I won't spend much time on the subsequent properties for which liability is an issue, readdressing these issues beyond perhaps making a couple of comments specific to the property. As Mr. Boardroom has noted to you, page 4 of his brief details the uses that are made of this property, and clearly the uses that are made of this property are uses that are necessary and important in the context of the provision of the school curriculum and the school teaching process for students. Some of the other properties will be a little bit different in the sense that they will be maintenance type properties, but this one, it is resources that historically, when we went to school, we had a guidance counselor located in the school, for example. Many of what, first of all, the scope of services provided to students is much broader today than it was when we went to school. That's the first thing I'll observe to you. Secondly, to the extent other services were provided, they were frequently present in the individual schools, but as Mr. Boardroom has noted, for efficiency and cost efficiency reasons, the school divisions have gone to a program of centralizing these services and putting them in central locations to provide them in a more cost-effective and efficient way. So, where does all of that take us? If we go to page 4 of my brief, we start with the concept that under the legislation, section 22(1)(d), real property is exempt from taxation where the real property is used for a public school within the meaning of the Public Schools Act. That's section 22(1)(d). And the Public Schools Act contains some definitions which are found on the lower half of page 4. That includes the definition of a school building, and a school building includes the buildings required or used in a school division for the purpose of imparting of instruction, and I'm just going to stop there. So that's the school, the actual school buildings, obviously. And those school buildings, and I'm on page 4, and I'm in the definition of school building. So those are the actual schools, and we're not having any dispute about whether the schools are exempt. But then that definition goes on to say, and I both bolded and underlined it, so that a school building includes buildings required or used for offices or other public school purposes. Public school purposes. And I'll suggest to you that clearly the services being provided in this building are public school purposes. What's going on in this building is supportive of the actual teaching, the curriculum, the teachers, the students. Everything that happens in this building is related to a public school purpose. There's also a definition of school site, which talks about an area of land used by a school division for the school building, teachers' residence, students' residence, offices, playground, including parking. And then we come to what have the courts had to say about this. So the leading decision, and what I've done, tab 1 of my materials includes the legislation, and maybe I should just turn the pages of that for a moment. So the pages are numbered in the lower right-hand corner, and if we go to page 4, that is part 6 of the Municipal Assessment Act, and that is the section that contains the liability and exemption provisions. And I've given you both the English and French versions for reasons which will become apparent in a moment. If you keep turning the pages, you come to page 6 in the lower right-hand corner, and there you see section 22.1, which starts, and I've just read that to you, that real property is exempt from taxation where the real property, and then if we turn the page, on the left-hand column we get subparagraph D, is used for a public school within the meaning of the Public Schools Act. And then if we turn the page, page 8, there is subparagraph D in the French version, and I'm going to show you what our Manitoba courts have had to say about that French version of the legislation. And I can tell you that when Mr. Therian has been a member of a panel hearing these matters, which he has on many occasions, he always says to me, Mr. Newman, show me the French. And I take him to this page, and I show it to him, and he reads it, and he says, yes,
well, that's hearsay evidence, very hearsay evidence. So what another member of a panel, different panel might say about this is not relevant.
Well, what I was simply going to say is that he confirms that what the Court of Appeal said is correct. That's all I was going to say. But let me take you to what the Court of Appeal had to say. So now we get to tab 2. Tab 2 involved a case concerning a Winnipeg School Division property. And in the course of this decision, the Court of Queen's Bench, so let's go back a step. The case started here, just as this one does. It went to the Court of Queen's Bench, which is the next step when you're dealing with liability and exemption. And then it found its way into the Court of Appeal from the Court of Queen's Bench. The Court of Queen's Bench determined that the exemption should be granted. That decision is found at tab 3 of the material I've given you. But the Court of Appeal ultimately is the highest court in our province. And so if you go to paragraph 6, talks about section 22.1b, which I've just given you. On to the next page, it quotes the section I've just given you. It quotes the definition of school site, which I've given you. It then talks about the decision of the judge. If you go to paragraph 11, page 4, it talks about the fact that while the general purpose of taxation legislation is to raise revenue, exemptions provided in taxation legislation evidence a public interest in giving relief to certain organizations which outweighs the public interest in the generation of revenue. And that's simply a recognition of the fact that the legislature, in their wisdom, will balance. And In paragraph 11, the court is noting that sometimes legislatures decide that certain uses or certain organizations should get exemptions. If we keep going to page 11, actually, let's come back one page to page 10, paragraph 24. Finally, the court said, while it was not argued in this appeal, the interpretation of section 22(1)D of the Municipal Assessment Act endorsed in these reasons is supported by a comparison of the French and English versions. It then sets out the French and English versions, which I took you to a few moments ago. And then on to page 11, paragraph 26. The English version indicates that real property is tax exempt where it is used for a public school within the meaning of the Public Schools Act. And that's why I took you to the definition of school building earlier on. The French version indicates that real property is tax exempt where it is used for the needs of a public school. So you can see the language is different. The French version suggests that the building simply needs to be used, the real property simply needs to be used for the needs of a public school. So that then begs the question, what are the needs of a public school? And the needs of a public school obviously include providing the spectrum of services that are necessary in order to allow a properly functioning education system to work. And I suggest to you that in the context of this property, clearly the uses made by this property, or the uses made by the Winnipeg School Division of this property, as detailed on page 4 of Mr. Borgstrom's brief, are consistent with the building, the real property being used for the needs of a public school. And that is the French version. And if we continue on in my brief now, so what I've done is, we're at page 5 of the text. I have walked you through the Manitoba Court of Appeal decision that is referenced on page 5 of the text of my brief. I have, at page 6, you see paragraph 26, which was in the trial judge's decision, and there they talk about, again, the public interest being outweighed. The public interest in taxation is outweighed by the public interest in giving relief from property taxation to certain organizations. And let's not lose sight of something here. When the City of Winnipeg sends a tax bill to the Winnipeg School Division for this building, there's two parts to it. There's the school taxes and there's the municipal taxes. Well, of course, the city just sends the school taxes back to the school division. So in a sense, that money is just running around the table. Clearly, the legislature intended that uses of properties for schools, and in the French version, used for school purposes, and in the definition of school building, used for other public school purposes, the collective of those items suggests, I would say to you, that the use of this property should entitle it to the exemption. And then finally, if we go to page 8 of the text of my brief, I point you there down at the bottom under the heading Conclusion about the Interpretation Act of Manitoba. And the Interpretation Act, if you turn the page, Section 6, every act should be interpreted as being remedial and given a fair, large, and liberal interpretation that best ensures the attainment of its objects. And then paragraph 7 of the Interpretation Act, the English and French version of acts and regulations are equally authoritative in accordance with the Manitoba Act. So what I'm saying to you is that a taxpayer is entitled to the benefit of the interpretations which are available under both the English version and the French version. And again, when we see that what the Court of Appeal had to say about the French version and the fact that the French version indicates simply that It's exempt if it's used for the needs of a public school. That, together with the definition of school building, to which I made reference to, which expressly contemplates that school buildings include buildings used for, and I'm at page 4 of the text of my brief, school buildings include buildings used for the imparting of instructions, but expressly they also include offices or buildings used for offices or other public school purposes. So the concept of other public school purposes is also picked up in the definition of school building. And so I say to you that the exemption is available both under the English version of the legislation and under the French version of the legislation, and therefore, in the context of this property, you ought to grant the exemption. I will have some questions of Mr. Valderrama once he presents his brief, but for now, that is my submission.
Do you have questions of Mr. Newman?
Yeah, just a couple, or just a few.
Or Mr. Bergson?
Yeah, just on the concept of this property being exempted under school or as a use for the needs of a school. Can the school operate without whatever's functioning in here? For example, could they still impart knowledge, or teachers can still impart knowledge to students, even though this property is not being used for the needs of the school?
My answer to you would be that they could not do so in accordance with the modern standards of education that are prescribed by the Public Schools Act. Theoretically, school can be taught in a tent. School can be taught in open air. But the modern standards of education prescribed by the Public Schools Act require that the needs of students in every respect be attended to, and we just have a much higher standard today than we did many years ago. So I think the answer is no, they could not without the subject property.
And this one here doesn't have any teachers teaching students in this property?
In the sense of what we would consider to be normal classrooms,
Yes,
I think the answer is no. But in the sense of providing the clinical support services, for example, the clinicians, they have the ability to meet with students in this premises. The audiology department will have the ability to meet with students and assess the students in these premises.
Would those services be special services outside of a curriculum, educational curriculum?
Well, I suppose it depends how you want to view what schools do today. And I would say to you that today's schools support students not only in the sense of providing curriculum to them, but also addressing their mental and physical well-being.
And if I might just extend on that, we also, when I went to school, we didn't have laptops, we didn't have internet.
No.
Those are all services that are provided now. Now, in this location, that's not part of the services that are provided in this location, but we're going to see a property today that they do. And so things like IT services, things like centralized printing, all form part of the school program. And service the needs of the students while they are functioning as they are supposed to, right? So it's really that this broad spectrum of all of these that are required for the needs of the schools.
In terms of the computers that you mentioned, would these computers be in-house in here, or do they have computers?
As I said,
oh,
it's
on
not,
the other property.
in this location, but it's certainly going to be in a different location. There are other school divisions that I'm aware of. For example, Louis Riel School Division has a server room in 900 St. Mary's that has a whole workshop where they set up the laptops to dispense out to the schools and the students. So those are part of the learning, but the services that are offered in here still form part of what is required for the needs of the students.
Right, and so the computer class that the students are I don't want to get into to the particulars of it, but for example, a computer class or maybe an English class or science class, are they held in a school or something similar to this, the subject property or the properties that we will be discussing?
The instruction will happen within the schools, but the provision of what is required to impart that instruction can and does quite often happen off-site from the schools.
And in this particular subject property, there are no gym class or gyms or anything that the students would
Well,
need.
there is a gym in here, and there's to go there. It's not used as a gym anymore.
No, for gym class.
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Linda, any questions?
So the Act clearly contemplates a size limitation on what's going to be provided to each school to provide these services, which is around the 4 hectare. I don't know about the size of this property, but considering all of these properties that are coming in to ask for the reclassification, would that be expanding the 4 hectares for the schools? Or?
Each location gets its own exemption. So that lengthy list that is attached to the assessor's brief that we saw on the last property and we'll see on this one, every one of those schools has their own exemption.
Right, I understand that. So what the question I'm asking you is that you started your argument by saying that these services originally would have been within individual schools, and that because of economies of scale, the school divisions have decided to put them in other places, right? So in effect, you're asking for another 4 hectare exemption for each one of these locations that's being added onto that, right? Which is greatly expanding the amount of space that the Act intended for schools to deliver these services. You follow my question?
I do, and so I'll observe, for example, that 4 hectares, the 4.047 hectares is 10 acres, and that the subject property, for example, the land area is 70,000 square feet. There aren't many schools that are 10 acres.
Okay.
There's a very few schools that are of that size. Most are considerably smaller. And if you take this 70,000 square feet and you added it on to most schools, you're not going to get anywhere near 10 acres.
Okay.
But more importantly, I'm going to say to you that I don't think it's a question of adding on by taking the 70,000 square feet here, for example, or the 29,000 square feet of gross floor area in the building. I don't think it's a question of that being tacked on to a school to have it fall within the 10 acres. Because of the use ultimately, each of the properties, I suggest, are entitled to their own separate exemption.
Right. My second question is this the first time that this particular property is being appealed for the classification?
It is not.
So are these at the municipal board yet?
So they don't go, that's not where they go.
Oh, right.
They
go to the
go
court.
to the Court of Queen's Bench,
Right.
and I can tell you that there are many, many cases now pending at the Court of Queen's Bench, and I can tell you many appealed by the city, many appealed by the school divisions.
Correct.
And I can tell you that in mid-February there was a meeting with a judge who is now going to manage the process of addressing the outcome of those cases.
Okay. And this would be one of the cases that would be part of that package then?
Well, not presently,
Okay.
but from a prior
Eventually.
from a prior cycle, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions.
Okay, I have several questions actually. One, you mentioned a tab 4 in your brief, but I don't see a tab 4.
No. And so to what tab 4 was originally, it was decisions that had been rendered favorable, and the panels have said to us frequently, stop giving us decisions. So I didn't include those favorable decisions, and that's
So they're just at this level.
So there have been decisions at this level on many, many properties, many favorable to the school divisions, but others also not favorable to the school divisions. So in fairness, to just give you the full picture. There have been no decisions other than the ones that are attached to this brief relating to the interpretation of the school tax sections from the courts.
Okay, that would certainly be most useful for the board. And you have to head to my third question, but my second question would be, there's a clear exemption for buildings that are used for administrative purpose.
It's the other way around.
Yeah, we're clear, yeah,
There's a
non-exemption.
clear exception to
Yeah.
the exemption, is
Yeah.
how I'll phrase it. Yes.
So the question comes down to what's an administrative purpose for,
And
presumably, any building that the school division uses would be for the needs of the school. I wouldn't think there would be any that's not for the needs of the school. So what does this exception entail?
So let's go to page 4 of the text of my brief, where you have the definition of school building. And so you can see that it starts out with what is a school building, and a school building is a building used for instruction or for offices or other public school purposes. So that's what's included within the definition of school building. But then it goes on to create the exception. And the exception is, but does not include a building or a part constructed, designed, or, here's the key, used solely or chiefly for administrative functions of the school division or school district, other than those exercised by principals and teachers. So what you're getting here is the general, it starts off by telling you what's included within the definition of school buildings. Then it creates an exception to what's included for use solely or chiefly for administrative functions. And then it creates an exception to the exception by saying that if it's a principal or teacher who's performing the administration, that still counts as a school building. But if it's used solely or chiefly for the administrative functions of the school division or school district, that does not fall within a school building. So for example, Winnipeg School Division number 1 has their, I'm going to call them main administrative offices located on Notre Dame. That building is, we don't seek an exemption in relation to that building, because that clearly is the administrative office of the school division. We're going to come to another property this morning where we're going to detail for you some of the uses in that building which are related to the administration of the school division, and some which are supportive of the schools, similar to the subject. But that's the answer to your question, Mr. Harden, is that if it's used solely or chiefly for the administrative functions of the school division, not administering a program or administering a school, because that means the guidance counselor who's in a school, or the guidance counselor who's at the subject property, or a clinician who's in a school, those people or their space arguably would not be subject to the exemption. I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is that if it's a principal or teacher who's doing those things, that's still exempt space, even though that's administration of a school. But when we're talking about the higher level of the hierarchy of school divisions, the superintendent, the chief financial officer, the secretary, those people, and their office space and where they operate from, that is the solely or chiefly for the administrative functions of the school division. That does not fall within the definition of school building, and therefore wouldn't be entitled to the exemption. Yeah.
Okay, so also this morning, we're going to hear about 395 Jefferson, which is the Seven Oaks School Division Administrative Offices. We find no cause to argue liability taxation on that. Let me back up. The property, and we're going to hear this morning, actually falls on a roll number with Victory School and with the Seven Oaks School Division Administrative Offices. That's a building that the school is properly exempt with their 10 acres. The office building is used solely or chiefly for the administrative purposes of the school division. We are not arguing liability in this one, Mr. Newman has already alluded to another property that we're going to hear this morning. Another example, I'm just bringing it up really quickly, and it's coming up this week, actually, at 150 Moray, which is the St. James Assiniboine School Division property right at Portage and Moray. That property has two separate buildings on it. One is the school division administrative offices, and the other is it's a former school, former Birchwood School. It is now the school division's professional staff development training center. That property, that portion of the property was exempted last cycle, and the city has carried that exemption through. The office, the administration office, facing on Portage, is used again solely or chiefly for administrative purposes, and if you're in on the hearing later this week, we find no argument with respect to liability on that building. So where there are cases like this where there are activities that are required for the needs of the public schools, we'll be arguing for the exemption, but we do not seek an exemption on those buildings used chiefly or solely for administrative purposes within the school division.
Okay, and given the role of the courts in this, would it be fair to say that this morning's decision will be overridden by whatever decision the courts make?
Not if you make the right decision.
Yes. Okay.
No pressure.
We always make the right decision. Sometimes the court disagrees with that. Sometimes courts make. Okay, thank you very much for that. Is there anything more on this? You decide which
Well, Mr. Valderrama's got to make his submission.
That's true too. You're right. Go ahead, Mr. Valderrama.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to lead you to page 11 of my brief, just to make a quick summation. Just at the bottom part, I'm just going to reiterate the fact that school building includes the buildings required or used in a school division or school district for the imparting of instruction or for the offices or other public school purposes, but does not include a building or a part thereof, constructed, designed, or used solely or chiefly for administrative functions of the school division or school district other than those exercised by principals and teachers. And I think that's, to me, that sounds like it is sort of like an encompassing statement of what a school building should be, what should be included. And some examples of public schools are on the preceding pages. And I think I have attached the previous decision on this one on page 6 by the board. Yes, it is this same property, 1075 for Ellington Avenue. And I think that's all that I have to say.
Okay, questions on this one?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. Mr. Valderrama, starting at page 8 of your brief, you attach various excerpts from the legislation, some of which we've looked at already, correct?
Yes, correct.
At page 9, you attach excerpts from the Public Schools Act that speak to the duties of school boards, correct?
Correct.
And section 41 then lays out a long list of duties of school boards.
Correct.
Okay. So, and it looks to me like you've also highlighted some of those. So, for example, on page 9, B.1 says that each pupil, or the school division, shall ensure that each pupil enrolled in a school within a jurisdiction of the school board is provided with a safe and caring school environment that fosters and maintains respectful and responsible behaviors.
Correct.
You highlighted that, correct?
Yes.
And then similarly, down a couple, B.3, every school board shall ensure that a written policy respecting school food and nutrition is prepared for each school in the school division. And you highlighted that, correct?
Yes, correct.
And then if we turn the page to page 10, subparagraph G, every school board shall, subject as otherwise provided in this act, employ teachers and such other personnel as may be required by the school division or school district. So part of the obligation of the school board is to hire not just teachers, but other personnel, correct?
Correct.
And that will include those people who provide the services detailed at page 4 of Mr. Borgstrom's brief and the services that are provided in the subject property, correct?
Correct.
Subparagraph I, every school board shall, subject to this act and regulation, prescribe the duties that teachers and other personnel are to perform. So again, it's not just teachers, but it's other personnel that the school division has responsibility in respect of, correct?
Correct.
Section K.1, every school board shall identify pupils who are disengaged from school or who are at risk of becoming disengaged and establish policies and procedures to support them becoming re-engaged or in school programming. So again, this is part of the broad obligation of school divisions to deal with students who are also having difficulties in school, correct?
Correct.
And that's part of what the people detailed on page 4 of Mr. Borgstrom's brief would do.
Correct.
And then over onto page 11, subparagraph O, every school board shall select and purchase or rent school sites and premises and build, repair, furnish, keep in order, and regulate the use of school buildings, enclosures, and movable properties. So part of the obligation of a school board is to build, repair, furnish, keep in order school buildings, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And down at the bottom, we see the definition of school buildings, which you read earlier and which I had addressed as well. But school buildings includes not just schools per se, but also other buildings or offices used for public school purposes, correct?
Correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Linda, any questions of the assessor?
No, I don't think so. Thank you.
Grim?
And I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. We will take a...
Can I just make a brief submission?
Sure.
I'm not going to repeat everything I said about the legislation or the case law, but this last series of questions I asked, clearly it goes to the point that today, school divisions, public schools, it's not just about, here's the curriculum and here it is. School boards have an obligation to deal, I'm going to use the word holistically, to deal with students and teachers at large and the full spectrum of what their needs are. And that's why school divisions hire and employ not only teachers but other personnel. And all the people listed here fall within the other personnel, and the people we're going to come to talk about in the subsequent hearings this morning, they fall within the other personnel. These are the obligations of school divisions today, to hire the full spectrum of personnel necessary to make sure that the standard of education we want our youth to have today are able to get and achieve from the public school system. And that includes repairing and furnishing and keeping in order school buildings, which by definition is not only the place where instruction is imparted, but it's the other buildings and offices used for public school purposes. And that is all going to fit into what you're going to hear about some of the other properties. It's a broad obligation that school divisions have today, and it's a broad obligation that I think you should recognize in terms of granting these. Thank you.
Summation?
Summation.
Okay. Now we'll take a break till 22:11. Okay, we'll come back to order. I understand the parties wish to revisit 1700 Portage Avenue at this time, so let's reopen the hearing on that matter.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Valderrama and I have had some discussions at the break, and we've agreed to resolve the matter at a value of $2,800,000.
$2,800,000, okay, and on what basis was that?
It's just a basis, frankly, of a number. We prefer simply to express it that way for the time being, but we have discussed it fully.
Yeah, the only thing is the board needs a basis for a decision, other than we can express a cap rate or anything like that?
Maybe I can just step outside for one moment with Mr. Valderrama, and let's see what we
Sure.
can do.
Okay.
All right.
Mr. Chair, it's based on my recommendation of $2.8 million, and under our agreed upon value.
Okay, I guess we're not going to get more than that. All right.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, now at the request of the appellants, we'll go to 491 Monroe Avenue. So again, it's class liability only?
In this particular case, yes, and so I guess I can explain it as we go through, but that's accurate.
All right, so then you have the onus on class and liability, so you can proceed.
Thank you. So this particular site, including pictures, but if we start at page 5, this site is a little unusual because it actually has 2 schools and divisional office building on the site all on one. And you'll see on page 5 from an overhead shot, and you'll see little yellow pins there. Starting from the bottom right would be Polson School, and that's an elementary school. And then adjacent to that, to the west, or to the left, if you will, is Monroe Junior High. And just above Monroe Junior High to the north is an office building. And if we take a look at page 6, that gives you a little better overhead view of the office building. That office building has a mix of administrative uses and uses or functions within that building that are in support of the needs of the students in the schools, or the needs of the schools, if you will. I show a street level shot of that particular office building on page 2, and I can tell you that the assessment excuse me, has, for each of the schools, is exempt. Each school, and I'm going by memory here, excuse me, there was agreement, if I recall correctly, last cycle, that each school would be entitled to its own 10-acre exemption. This office building, though, does actually use up some land on the site as well, so there wouldn't necessarily be included in this building some land behind it which is used for parking. So the assessment, the taxable assessment that we're talking about here is $1.6 million. So $1,600,000 is the taxable assessment that we're addressing here today. There's no argument with the amount of that assessment. What we're talking about here is what would be the appropriate allocation given the functions within this particular building. Now, subsequent to filing our brief in this matter, and you'll see on page 7 of our brief that they had previously provided some breakdowns based on their previous estimates. I've now actually been provided with a floor plan of the administrative office, and I'm wondering, without Mr. Valderone's objection, and I'm happy to have him look at it, whether or not it would, I think it's useful to the board to provide support for the actual areas that we're suggesting should be exempted within this building. So,
Technically, this is new evidence, but do you have any objection to it being handed out?
Floor plan? Is this a floor plan?
yeah.
Pardon? I don't
It's a
object.
floor plan.
No, I
It
don't
also
object,
shows,
Mr. Chairman.
yeah, it also shows a detailed breakdown of the uses within the
I'm
building.
not objecting to this.
Okay, hand it out.
So, he's already got his.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'll give you one to take a look at it, and I'm not going to be actually referring to the floor plans themselves. The spaces are readily identified and color-coded. The first page is the main floor of this building. The second page shows the basement floor plan of this building. The school division has actually gone through some effort in providing this to us. What I am suggesting is that the spaces identified as the IT department is for the needs of the public schools, and the space used for the print shop, which is the centralized printing services for the school division, should equally be exempted in terms of its square footage. The communications department I have not included, but I think that an argument may be forwarded in respect of that. But if we consider only the IT department and the print shop, that works out to a total of 4,856 square feet, which is 33.3%, or 1/3 of the building area.
Mr. Chair, just a quick clarification on this matter. 589 Roach Street, this is the same.
So if we,
Okay.
let me come back.
Okay.
So if we look at our page 2, that office building, actually, what you're looking at there is the west-facing front of the office building. That's actually on Roque Avenue in East Kildonan. And it has a civic address of 589 Roque Street. Now it's on one roll, and the one roll is under this, or the assessment department has identified the entire roll as 491 Monroe, but each school has its own address, as does this office building. So this is the office building that we're talking about here.
Speaking of roll number, you didn't identify the roll number to start with. So
I'm sorry, yeah. So the civic address is 491 Monroe Avenue. Roll number is 02004092800, and the file number 19-3328. It's held in the name of the River East School Division Number 9, which is effectively the River East Transcona School Division. So, breaking down the $1.6 million taxable assessment on this property, we're suggesting an allocation. I wrote it down.
when you say this property, do you mean this building in particular? Or
This
the
building in
entire-
particular, yeah. The other two buildings are in dispute, they're fully exempt.
Yeah.
And so it's effectively moot for all the purposes here today.
Just wanted to clarify when
When
you said this property.
Yeah, so the office building itself has a classification of other, and it has an assessed value of $1.6 million based on the $1.6 million and the allocation of the IT department and the print shop to an exempt status. So we would be looking for a change or reallocation of that assessment of $533,000 to the 40E classification, and at a reduction, so we're adding a new exempt classification which mathematically then leaves us with a taxable assessment or another classification of property of $1,067,000. It's based on a mathematical allocation of those square feet.
Say 40E?
Yeah. For the print shop and the IT department only.
So you think fully exempt?
No, because there are also, the school division's administrative offices are also housed in here, and if we go through the
No,
list
but
in
we're
here,
talking school tech exempt or fully exempt.
fully exempt, 40E.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's within the legislation. The schools are fully exempt.
So 53340E
Yes.
and 1067.
As other, or
60.
60. Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it?
Well, I think that's the information I wanted to cover. It's going to be very closely related to what we talked about in the last building.
Yeah, we don't
in
need to
terms
repeat
of,
the
yeah,
same argument on that.
exactly so.
Okay, Mr. Boardroom, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Linda, any questions?
No questions?
No questions.
Okay, you didn't give your presentation. This time I didn't get ahead of myself.
So I'm not going to repeat what I said before. You'll take it as applying. But obviously you can see from what Mr. Boardroom has said, that the IT department supports what goes on in the schools. And similarly, the print shop supports what goes on in the schools. And that's why those areas are the subject of the request for the exemption. The rest of it falls within the administration, solely or chiefly for the administration of the school division in accordance with the definition of school building, and that's why that's not being sought. That's all we'll say for now.
Okay, anything resonating from that?
None, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you can go on with your presentation.
Again, the file number is 19-3328. The roll number for the property is 0204092800. It's located at 491 Monroe Avenue. Has two split classifications, as indicated by the appellant earlier. The first one is fully taxable, which is assessed at $1,600,000, using the reference date of April 1st, 2018, and the roll year of 2020. And the second classification and liability is an institutional property exempt, with an assessed value of $4,247,000. Using the same reference date of April 1st, 2018, and the roll year of 2020. And on page 3 are some of the cost reports pertaining to the building sections, different building sections. And on page 5 or page 4 are a couple of aerial photos of the subject property. And on page 5 are some land sale comparables ranging from $1.89 up to $14.92 per square foot. And some maps at the bottom of the subject property and the comparable land sales. And a summary on page 6. Different detached structures totaling to $38,000. Land valuation using a net rate of $3.24 per square foot, which amounts to $1,580,000. Building, total building, which is split into two. The first one has $1,430,000, which is a taxable component, and then the next one has $2,799,000 of building, and a detached structure of $38,000, which are both exempt. And I think that's the presentation I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, do you have any questions of the assessor?
Again, looking at pages 8 through 10 of your brief, those are the same excerpts from the Public Schools Act that we addressed in the last presentation, correct?
Correct.
And again, we would acknowledge that the school division has an obligation to employ appropriately qualified IT personnel, people who know how to run a printing shop, and that both the computers and the printing materials are used in the schools.
Correct.
Those are my questions.
Any questions?
I don't have a question for the assessor, but I could address a question back to the
Sure.
applicant. The print shop and the IT department support the activities in the two schools that are on this site,
No, for the entire school division.
but including the two schools that are on these sites.
That's correct.
This entire site's 11 acres, but you indicated at the begining
Well, each school
is entitled to its 10 acres.
would be
That
entitled to its own
right?
10-acre exemption.
But this site is well, quite significantly smaller than that.
That's correct. But we would also, just to extend that thought a little bit, we also agree that some lands would be necessary for this standalone office building as well. So
Thank you. Paul?
I have no questions.
Okay, and I have no questions, so thank you for your presentation. Did you want to go on to, which one did you say?
678 Morey.
678 Morgan?
Yeah, is a I'll call it a mixed-use property. Sorry, not mixed use. A mixed argument property. We'll be dealing with both liability classification and quantum.
And quantum, okay. And what about Jefferson Avenue, is it the same?
Jefferson is solely quantum.
Oh, okay, so, oh yeah, that's on you're gonna do. That's the liability. Okay,
So we're doing Moray?
what we're doing, Maureen.
Okay.
Then Mr. Newman can go get some lunch or something.
So I'm not sure how you want to approach this in terms of procedure. I'm happy to go first. I'm happy to cover off our evaluation. My goal is to release Mr. Newman as soon as we can.
Well, let's hear the class and liability first, and then Mr. Balderrama can go through
Okay, so I'm going to take you through some pictures. I have inspected this property in August of 2017. These are the pictures that I took. We'll start on page 14 of our brief. And I can tell you, as we go through them, that this property is...
Did you read the roll number?
I'm sorry, I keep doing that.
Yeah, we're...
The property address is 678 Morey Street. The roll number is 0708131200, and the file number is 19-3399. Yep. So if we start at page 13, you'll see there at the bottom of the page, this is identified as a maintenance shop. The address from the school division is 678 Morey, and you'll see each of the areas on this floor plan identified, or many of the areas identified with what their uses are. So going up the right-hand side, this serves as a transportation coordination facility in part. It has a mechanical shop where they do repairs to divisional equipment. You'll see there above that the areas identified as number 10. Audio-visual repairs, those are for the school division or across the school division. 8 and 9 are trades and controls. 11 is the foreman's office. 12 is used for clerical purposes for the functions that go on in this building. And I'll take you through the pictures in a moment. The loading dock and mezzanine, this property has one loading dock on the north end of the building, and that's where that space is. There is a fairly large materials storage area on the left-hand side at the top of the page. There is a paint shop in there. There's also a carpentry workshop in there. So all of these functions are centralized services for the entire school division. So if you turn to page 14, you'll see some pictures of the outside of the property. The bottom of page 14 is the single loading door that I was talking about, and at the top is actually the west side of the building. You'll see there at the top of 15, that's what I talked about earlier, the transportation office. There's a desk, there's a bunch of walkie-talkies. It's where they coordinate student bus services. There are buses parked on this site, and I'll show you those in a moment on the overhead picture. The buses are not, I'll call it dispensed, that's not the right word, from this location. There we go, dispatched from this location. Rather, this is where they come for repair coordination. The repairs are provided by a third party off-site. The repairs do not happen in here, but this is where they come in and go out to be repaired. So on page 16, you'll see there are some of the plans on the top picture where they're talking about a middle school wood shop renovation. That's part of the maintenance operations that we're talking about that are centralized in this location. On page 17, you'll see office space there that's used in part for the functions in this location. You'll see there that they have a lunchroom on page 18. That's for the people that are in this building. Locker room and change room and a washroom on page 19. Page 20, that's as you're looking down the hallway towards the north end of the building and towards the loading and receiving dock. On the left-hand side of the top picture, that's part of the materials storage that I was talking about earlier. Page 20 is another picture as we get closer to the north end of the building, and you'll see a little jog to the left. That's where it'll open up, and I'll show you that picture in a moment. So we look on page 22, and as we're carrying on or walking through the building from the top of page 21, when you turn the corner, that's what you see. You're going to see a little loading area, and then there's another little jog where they maintain records of plans, potential renovations to different areas like we saw in the middle school wood shop. On the bottom picture on page 22, that's the materials stores that we're talking about, but these are for materials used across the school division. Similarly on page 23, just some more pictures of that same area. Why does that look like it's the same picture? Because it is. Okay. And then on page 24, this is some of the repair mechanical areas and the carpentry shop at the bottom of page 24. Similarly on page 25, part of the carpentry shop again. And then page 25 is just one of the offices. Oh, we saw that picture already. Page 26 at the top, that's part of the area at the north end of the building on the east side around the jog that we were talking about a moment ago. This is where the plans are kept for buildings within the school division, past renovations projects, potential future projects as well. 27, same thing, more of the repair shop areas, the mechanical repairs. 28, 29, again, just show those areas in more detail. You can see there at the bottom of page 29 all the little rolled up plans being stored in the cubicle. They have file folders in there. Those are all dealing with projects across the school division. So I've gone through a fairly lengthy description based on our inspection of the property in 2017. We show that on our page 3. I will not read through it verbatim, but I will just highlight that it's a centralized repository for maintenance and facilities, transportation, and ancillary offices for the St. James Assembly School Division. It provides a centralized facility for effectively all of the routine maintenance and major projects. They dispatch repair people out from this location in the school division vans to repair for minor repairs at school division properties. As you showed in the pictures, it has offices for the maintenance supervisor and for the trades and transportation supervisor and the associated staff and administrative support staff for the people operating in this location. These staff members coordinate all maintenance and facilities projects for the schools across the school division. We've gone through the picture. The tradespeople utilize the site as a centralized location. It includes mill workers, plumbers, electricians, painters, and other maintenance staff, again, for dispatch across the schools across the division. So, based on that, and without getting into the issue of quantum, that's, I think, what I wanted to highlight in terms of the use of this building.
Okay, so are you then arguing that the entire building should be exempt?
Yes.
Okay. That wasn't clear from your
I
presentation.
apologize, yeah. There are, as you saw in the property on Monroe, that very clearly had some administrative functions. Some areas that were chiefly or solely administrative functions. That's not the case here. This is used for the maintenance of properties within the school division.
Okay, do you have any questions, Mr.?
It's the same questions as the previous property picture.
Okay, Linda, do you have any questions?
So you would argue that these are activities that would be exempt if they were in an individual school and would normally be held within an individual school?
So, again, let's go back to the time when we went to grade school. Every school that I was ever in had an individual who frequently was called a custodian. The custodian frequently had a workshop in the school. They frequently did what I'm going to call maintenance, desks, chairs, things that needed repair. So this is part of the theme of centralization. Of course, things are more complicated in the schools than they were many years ago, but it's the same concept, and it's the same concepts that are reflected in the duties of the school boards that I questioned Mr. Valderrama on earlier. The school boards have to employ not only teachers, but other personnel as required by the school division. That's section 41(1)G. They have to select, build, repair, furnish, keep in order, and regulate the use of school buildings. The schools can't operate without this supportive facility. The only reason this facility is there is to support the school, and as I say, the schools can't operate without this. They can't be maintained in their proper condition, safe for students, safe for teachers, and for all of those reasons, this is both under the English version, a school building, but also under the French version used for school purposes, and I would say to you entitled to the exemption.
If I just might add, because we have this 150 Morey coming up later on this week. That's the property I talked about earlier, partly the Old Birchwood School, partly the St. James, the Assembly School Division administrative offices. And I can tell you from my review of permits within that building, from my personal inspection of that building, none of the projects going on out of here relate to that building. It hasn't been updated in any meaningful way since it was built in 1975.
Are you arguing now that individual schools no longer have custodians and ability to do minor repair within their schools?
No, I'm not arguing that. Clearly, there are personnel in each school who still have responsibilities, but they've been, for two reasons. One, things have become much more complex in terms of the equipment that's used, and secondly, again, for reasons of efficiency and cost effectiveness, they've chosen to centralize a lot of these activities, but no, there are still services that are provided in each school. But you won't have a full carpentry shop in each school, for example.
but you probably never did.
But you would have had, you're right, but you would have had a custodian who had the ability to take a desk, for example, if the wood had split on a desktop, and some clamps and glue it back together and potentially make it usable again, using that as an example.
Anything larger, they would have contracted out?
Either contracted out, in all likelihood, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And
I have no question.
okay, I have no questions on the other classification liabilities, so you can proceed, Mr. Boardroom, on quantum. No, sorry, you're on classification
Yeah,
liability.
with that, Mr. Newman's
Yes.
presentations, I think, are done here.
I have no other further to add to the previous presentation.
Classification, okay, I just wanted to get
It's the
that.
same as the previous.
So Mr. Newman can lead in, since we're done with class and liability.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now.
We'll see you soon. Okay, so you can proceed on the quantum then.
Quantum, Mr. Chair, would be on sale the first one, 2%?
Yes, you have the onus on quantum.
Okay, the file number is 19-3399. As the roll number of 07081312000. The property is located at 678 Moray Street. We're dealing with the roll year of 2020 using reference date of April 1st, 2018. The assessed value is $699,000. The property has one story, one section, with an effective year built of 1978. A construction class of masonry bearing walls with an average wall height of 12 feet. It has a land area of 52,195 square feet, a planned area of 10,512 square feet, and a gross floor area of 10,512 square feet. On page 3, we have a couple of aerial photos of the subject property. And on page 2, the cost summary by building section. There's only one building. It has an RCN LD of $321,000. On page 4 are some land sale comparables. They're all ranging from $4.63 up to $27.82 sale price per square foot. Just below it is the map of the subject property and comparable land sales. And on page 5 is the cost report. The first section pertains to detached structure. It has paving concrete of 15,000 square feet with a unit cost of $5.10, an RCN value of $76,500, a depreciation of 78%, giving it an RCNLD of $17,000. Next section is the land valuation. It is class and liability of 60T with a net area of 52,195 square feet, a net rate of $6.92 per square foot, and a land value of $361,000. The last two remaining, second to the last section is the building. The building has a $321,000 and a detached structure of $17,000, giving it a total of $338,000 with a class and liability of 60T. So in summary, land and building summary, the land value is $361,000, the building value is $338,000, including detached structure, which totals to $699,000. That is under the cost approach. And page 6 is the previous board decision on the property and some liability to taxation, which has been discussed earlier. And I think that's my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Questions, Mr. Brookstrom?
I do have actually just a few. You've already been asked it this morning, but I'll ask you to confirm that the cost approach is most applicable when the property being examined is a special purpose property that tends not to trade in the market?
Correct.
And it would be most applicable to a property that is new or almost new, correct?
Correct.
And subject property was built in 1978,
Yes, that's correct.
and so we're talking about here a 40-year-old property, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is the depreciation shown within your evidence depreciation that is applied strictly from age-life depreciation tables?
Yes, correct.
And that would, if we're going to do a cost approach, though, we need to examine depreciation from 3 separate causes, correct?
Correct.
And one of those would be physical depreciation,
That's correct.
and another would be functional depreciation.
Correct.
So in terms of recreating this building, the cost approach that the city has applied here has recreated a 12-foot wall height, correct?
Correct, based on this one.
Is that a functional obsolescence for an industrial type building, a 12-foot wall height?
Well, it depends on the use of the building. 12 foot is sufficient, I think, for this property, for what is being used.
Right, but we're not talking about value in use, we're talking about the value of only seller, building buyer, correct?
Correct.
So is a 12-foot, you'd agree with me that this closely resembles a storage warehouse?
Yes.
And in terms of a storage warehouse, would a 12-foot wall height be deficient in terms of market expectations?
Again, as I mentioned, I mean, these are built 1978, and so it wasn't, there was no renovations that were done to increase the wall height, so it's 12 feet is 12 feet, it's smaller.
And so let me come back to the question and ask you again. Is 12-foot wall height in what is essentially a storage warehouse a deficient height, or a height deficient from what normal market expectations would be?
Again, in the standard of nowadays, it is low.
Okay. And so by recreating the 12-foot wall height in your cost approach, you haven't recognized functional obsolescence in this property, right?
The RCNLD is not a reproduction cost new, less depreciation. It is replacement cost new. So
Right.
meaning it may have addressed some of the functionalities or depreciations by using replacement cost new.
Let's take a look at your page 2 then. The cost summary by building section. It's been done by one building, and you'll see there right above RCN it says wall height 12.
Yes,
That
correct.
refers to the 12-foot wall height, yes?
Yes, correct.
And so there wouldn't be any functional obsolescence in there, correct?
Based on the RCN that's used here, no, it's not.
And in fact, you've already answered that the depreciation that's in place on this building reflects age-life depreciation,
Correct.
correct?
Correct.
So on an industrial storage warehouse, would a typical income approach be, or would the assessment typically be based on an income approach?
For industrial properties, yes.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Okay, Linda, any questions?
I have no further questions.
And I have no questions.
Okay, I have none, so you can proceed with your evaluation then.
So the property is owner occupied, and we already talked about that. So 10,512 square feet in size, what the wall height. I took a look, the income approach is the only approach to value that I considered here. Took a look on page 8, and we looked at a number of rental comparables of varying wall height. The one that they are all superior to the subject in terms of wall height, with the single exception of number 5. And the rent for that particular property with a 12-foot wall height, the same as the subject, 10,715 square feet in size. Subject is very close to that, $425 a square foot. So we considered all of these rental comparables. And you'll see there that the average is a little over 5, the median is a little under 5. Based on all of that and with consideration given to the physical characteristics of the subject property, I selected 475 as the most likely rent that the property would achieve if it was exposed on the open market. I took a look at, turning to page 9, at vacancy rates. I haven't included the detailed breakdown in this report. I can tell you that the Johnson report in the St. James area actually suggests something closer to 6% as a vacancy rate. We have, in this case, used 4%, reflecting the vacancy and bad debt allowance. Shortfall is the 375, typically used by the departments for industrial properties. We have, in support of a non-recoverable expense allowance, filed a separate non-recoverable study. This is the only evidence in respect of this matter before you. We suggest a 7% rate based on that. We have also filed as a separate filing our industrial capitalization rate study. Again, that is the only evidence before you with respect to capitalization rates. Based on that, and within the study, with recognizing the risks associated with 12-foot wall height on an industrial type property, we selected 8% as the appropriate cap rate. And so we go through the mathematics on page 10, and we're looking for a reduction to $538,000 aside from the change in the classification and liability to taxation. So with that, I'm open to questions.
Any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Any questions?
In the 2018 cycle, was the cost approach used by the city or the
I believe
income
that's
approach? The cost approach was used?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions.
So your income and your costs.
Well, and really that's what it comes down to is which approach do you apply. I have to tell you that in industrial type properties, the department comes in here, this is the one exception. Well, there'll be another one today which I'll take issue with. They come in with an income approach. And so why they don't do it on this one, a matter of internal policy, but typically, and when you see the pictures of the property, it's effectively a storage warehouse. That's what it's used as. It's used for centralized repairs and maintenance, but very similar to an SWH, and so an income approach would certainly be my suggestion that that would be the most appropriate approach to use.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, Mr. Boldram, why, simply because the owner is a school division, how does this differ from any other industrial warehouse?
I haven't dealt with this property particularly previously, so I'm not sure why this one is on cost approach. However, all I know is that it's not typically traded, that's all. They can be rented out. I'm not sure how much. I'm not even sure if they can be rented out.
When they're typically traded, if the school division were not to be using it, decided this is now surplus to our needs, could they just not sell it to some industrial user? Isn't that what likely would happen?
Most likely. However, keeping it at cost approach the same way as before has been with this property, and I'm not sure why it has a transition to an income approach. Certainly there is merit to it, however, there could be a reason why. It's been 2 cycles already, or the first one that I've seen, it was decided that it should be maintained at a cost approach. So I don't see the reason why it should shift. Would there be merits to a different approach? Who knows? It could be something that we could look at as a whole and observe all of the properties that are owned by the school division, whether it should be under the cost or under other consideration in terms of the approach. But to me, the way I see it is it was confirmed before and it was argued under the cost approach, and I don't see it changing.
Okay, thank you for that.
Just to extend on that, and when we talk about properties that don't typically sell in the market, that has evolved over the years, and you now see more and more churches selling. There's the church on Main Street, I believe it's near St. John Avenue. It was actually converted into condominiums. We have the old church at Crazy Corner there. Actually, Planet Hollywood moved in, the comic store moved into there. They purchased the church, they moved into there, they now run a retail operation there. It used to be breweries were done on a cost approach because they required very specialized equipment. That's not the case anymore. There are many microbreweries. The one on Rothwell now has a tap room and a microbrewery in there. Fort Garry Brewery is up the street on Lowson. They rent that space. And so breweries have also evolved. So the properties to which an income approach might be applicable, certainly I would suggest has evolved over time. And this, as an example of a 40-year-old building with a 12-foot wall height to try and apply a cost approach to it, certainly isn't something that I would undertake. And I can tell you that I'm Marshall certified, both in terms of the computer software as well as the manual. I went down to an IAA course more than 15 years ago. Learn how to do that properly. This isn't something that would qualify as yielding an accurate estimate of value by a cost approach. I guess that's a summation, sorry.
Certainly more evidence. Okay. Okay, we've done Wellington, Morey, Jefferson next.
Sure.
95 Jefferson. Let me find it. Oh, this is the big thing. This is Jefferson. Jefferson is, you've withdrawn the other 2 points of appeal, so it's quantum only?
That's correct.
Okay, so...
I don't know if I just might expand on that. For exactly the same reasons that I talked about earlier, where this building is actually used solely or chiefly for administrative purposes of the school division.
Okay, so on quantum, then you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next property has a file number of 19-2964. It has a roll number of 1102-004-1000. It is located at 395 Jefferson Avenue. The property has 2 split classification, a total of assessed value of $5,067,000. The first classification and liability is institutional property exempt. It is assessed at $3,802,000. The second classification and liability has other taxable, which is assessed at $1,265,000 using the reference date of April 1st, 2018 and a roll year of 2020.
Is there any dispute on the exempt? I didn't think there would be, so please focus on the taxable.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It has 1 story, 6 sections, effective years built of 1990 to 2014. There were some additions over time. It has masonry bearing walls with an average wall height of 12 feet to 22 feet. It has a land area of 304,711 square feet. A plan area 53,908 square feet. And a gross floor area 56,852 square feet. On page 3 are some photos of the subject property. And on page 4 are some land sale comparables. They're all ranging from $1.89 up to $14.92 per square foot. And just below it is the map of the subject property and comparable land sales. On page 5 is the summary of cost valuation. The first section pertains to the detached structures, which are all valued a total of $50,000, which are all exempt. On second portion is the land valuation. The 60T portion is 14.2% with a net area of $43,269. Has a net rate of $3.84. 43,269 square feet with a net rate of $3.84 per square foot, giving it a land valuation of $166,000. And the third section is the land again, and the fourth section is the building section. The taxable component is $1,099,000, so giving it a taxable component of a total of land and building valuation of $1,265,000. And some additional information regarding class and liability. And that's my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any questions?
Just a couple, actually. On your page 2, building number 4 is actually the office building that we are talking about here. We're not talking about the school or the daycare, right? So just the office building.
Yes.
And so this there's a description at the top under the number 4, but this has been costed out as a Class C office building, correct?
Correct.
Were you aware that this property has been appealed for at least 2016 and 2018?
2016. Oh, I have to take a note of that one. No, I'm not sure.
Were you aware that this board has reduced the 2016 and 2018 assessment on the office building based on an income approach?
No, I'm not aware of it. No.
Do you know why the department keeps using a cost approach on what is clearly an office building?
It's been applied to the entire property, the cost approach.
But it would be easy enough to simply apply an income stream model rents to the subject structure, yes? The office structure?
I'm not sure on the easiness of or hard or difficulty on that one.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
No questions.
I have no questions.
Okay, you can proceed then if you're...
Thank you. So again, the sole issue that we are in here arguing about is the taxable assessment in the amount currently of $1,265,000. That is the office building and the lands associated with it. We have applied an income approach. I can tell you, and the assessor's not aware, but I can tell you that we have acted for the Seven School Division for at least 2016 and 2018 appeals on this property. This board has reduced the assessment based on the income approach we brought in, and so we are applying exactly the same process here. We go through some rental comparables on page 9. I can tell you that all of the properties, 1 through 6, are on Border Street. The other ones are addressed there. You see a range of rents. Now, just to back up for a minute and take you to the location of the property on page 4, you'll see there the little red dot in the picture on page 4. That's Victory School. The building that we're talking about here is actually right on Powers Street, on the same roll with the cars parked behind it. That's the office building that we're talking about here. The other thing that we need to bring to your attention is that the zoning on this parcel is PR2. That's Parks and Rec active zoning. That doesn't permit an office use. Now this one will be grandfathered, but in terms of if this property, and it happens from time to time where schools become surplus, they get sold off, sometimes they get scraped and redeveloped with residential. There is frankly a large question as to whether or not an office use would continue to remain in this location. And we said all of that. We took a look at the rental comparables on page 8. Based on all of those, we are suggesting a rental rate $8.50 a square foot. Overall, that is at a rate of $9 per square foot to the 9,567 square feet of main floor area, and $6 per square foot to the 1,894 square feet of basement area. So the $8.50 is a blended rate, main floor and basement. 5.5% is the department's OFS vacancy rate, and we're not disputing that in terms of an income approach. Similarly, $7 per square foot shortfall is for OFS type properties under the model. Again, we've already talked about the non-recoverable expenses. We have included a separately filed document for that. We think 7% is the right number. We have included a separate office capitalization rate study. Again, the only evidence before you with respect to office capitalization rates, and you'll see in there for suburban office buildings, given this location, we think, and its age, we think that 8% should be properly used in this case. We go through the mathematics on page 11, and we're looking for a reduction based on all of that to $1,016,016.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, yeah.
Questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Are there any questions?
I have no questions.
And I have no questions.
Thank you. Let's see, which one have we got in there? We're hopping all over to McPhillips. Well, we got that vacant land too, which, do you have any preference?
Well, we can deal with McPhillips first.
Okay. 2356 McPhillips. I gotta make sure I'm looking at the right brief. And it's quantum only, so you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This property has a file number 19-2790. It has a roll number 0500579000. It is located at 2536 McPhillips Street. We're dealing with the roll year of 2020, using reference date of April 1st, 2018. The assessed value is $1,611,000. It's one building, one premise, and a single story, with an actual year built of 1980, a wall height of 18 feet, construction class of masonry bearing walls. It has a land area of 218,226 square feet, a planned area of 21,036 square feet. Gross floor area is the same. On page 3 are some photos of the subject property. And on page 4 are some rent comparables. There's one that's registered $3.61. The others, I'm not sure what it's not budgeted for the rent. On page 5 is the income approach for the transit warehouse income stream. And I'll read through the page 6. It's easier. The potential rent is $125,795 with a vacancy loss of 3.5%. An expense ratio of 2%, and a shortfall rate of $3.75 per square foot, giving it a net operating income of $116,203. Using the capitalization rate of 6.5%, the capitalized value is $1,787,738. These are all model-driven parameters. And on page 7 is the some capitalization rate chart indicating some industrial range of 5.5 to 9.8%. And I think that's all the presentation I have for this property, Mr. Chair.
Okay, questions, Mr. Briggs?
I do have a couple. This property was initially assessed on the basis of the cost approach, correct?
Not sure the previous assessment on this one.
I'm talking about the 2020 assessed value.
2018 or
2020 assessment was originally based on cost.
It says income on this one, but I'm
Okay, so
not
let's take a
sure.
look at page 5,
Yeah.
and you see there the value of $1,788,000.
Yes, correct.
Now, if we turn back to your page 1, the assessed value is $1,611,000.
Correct.
And so let me ask you again, what was the basis of the original assessed value?
I don't know.
Fair enough, and that's fine. So you show in your evidence at your page 4, one rental comparable at $3.61 a square foot.
But there was an error in pulling out the net rent,
So
so I'm not sure why they're not.
Can we apply 361 to this property?
Again, as I mentioned, I'm not even sure where this one's pulling from, and the $1,611,000. So I don't know.
But
Can I just step into, the 1,611,000 is what appears on the roll number now?
It's
yes,
what appears on the first
So that was the
page.
value that was being appealed.
yes.
Okay, so the 1,788, I mean, you haven't done the paperwork to apply for an increase, so
No.
this is just to support the previous value then.
I'm not sure if it's the previous value, Mr. Chair, so, yeah. I don't know what happened when it was pulling all the numbers. I apologize on that one.
Okay. But in any event, the board can't consider a value higher than $1,611,000.
I understand, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And this property is owned by the Seven Oaks School Division.
Yes, it is.
And are you aware that this property is vacant and for sale?
No, I'm not aware.
And the information you show on page 5 is all model driven?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, yes, correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, and then any questions?
So you have no explanation for why this particular building is being used, the income approach is being used just for
None.
here? You have no information on that?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you.
That was my only question, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so you can proceed then.
Thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background, I can tell you that this property is owned by the Seven Oaks School Division, that it was offered for sale by the Seven Oaks School Division, that a conditional sale on the property fell through, so it remains school division property, remains for sale, and remains vacant. They have moved the functions that were carried on in here, which were the school division's maintenance, transportation, and custodial service center, out to West St. Paul on Grassmere Avenue. They've opened up a brand new facility out there.
So they moved out of town.
So they moved out there, and they constructed a new facility, and they fully occupy it currently, and in fact they did quite a number of months ago. So what we have here is a reported, let me just take to the very last page. This is the page that we typically print off every reassessment for every property that we review, and you'll see there that there is no commercial summary available. Typically, that means to me that the building was done on a cost approach, but the details are not provided. If we look at the page previous to that, we'll see there that the department, so the second last page, the department shows an 18-foot wall height. That's consistent with what the city has in their information, but I'm going to tell you that that's an average wall height. So if we take a look at the pages 4 as well, So on the bottom of page 3, you can see an overhead shot, and there you can see the different sections of the building. So to me, it's been clearly built at different times over the years. Somehow the department's records have amalgamated everything together. And as we look on page 4, this is as you drive on the side street west of the property and look back at it, you'll see there that there are differential wall heights, and you'll see there that a great portion of the building are a much lower wall height than 18th floor. So you'll also see in the top picture that there is an extensive or a fairly large amount of land associated with this building. And I've dealt with that separately, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I've gone through my evaluation and then considered the additional lands. So it's an industrial property for all intents and purposes. I do know that the city's evidence on page 5 shows it as a TRW. That's not accurate. I think it's more akin to an industrial warehouse. You can see there the overhead doors, more akin to a storage warehouse than a truck terminal. So we don't disagree with the gross floor area, 21,036, no mezzanine space, no basement. We took a look at a number of rental comparables on page 8, and you'll see there the rental range. A number of them are stepped up, reasonably close to the reference period that we're talking about. Based on all of that, and with regard to the what looks to me to be deficient wall height, certainly for the northern portion of this building, $475 a square foot is the rent that we've applied. That's significantly lower than the rate that the city has suggested at $598. Certainly in terms of our rental comparables, a lower rate is certainly supported based on all of that. Vacancy rate, again, I reviewed the Johnson report. For this particular area, it's closest to the Inkster Industrial, and that would again attract a rate in excess of 6%. If you look at our industrial cap rate study, we talk about other development, and we filed it separately on this property. Maybe I'll just go over it really quick. If we take a look at our separately filed industrial cap rate study, and I'll wait for you to catch up. Starting at page 5, we talk about what's going on in Winnipeg and adjacent areas. I'm not going to go over every word in this study, but I'm going to tell you that of the lands, industrial lands developed in Winnipeg and the surrounding area, only 1/3 of industrial lands have actually happened, of lands developed in the capital region, have happened within Winnipeg city boundary. Brookport and Brookside, the Arm of Rosser, the Arm of Headingley, the Arm of McDonald have all contributed to that. If you've been around the North Perimeter, you will have seen all of the development going on in West St. Paul. I haven't included that in here, but there is also a significant amount of industrial development in West St. Paul. All of that arises from the now available Westman Water Co-op. So they now can provide water and sewer to these locations, and so it's having an impact on not only the risk of industrial properties in Winnipeg, but they don't have business tax, RM of Rosser or RM West St. Paul. So it's a competitive advantage that they can offer to not only owners, but to tenants in those municipalities. So again, only 1/3 of industrial development, of industrial lands, new industrial lands in the capital region, are within the city of Winnipeg boundaries, and that's why. I do go over a bit of the vacancy from the Johnson report in there. Based on that, and the areas in Inkster, I've already chatted about that, I've stabilized at 4%. You'll see me coming in here down the line with much more detailed individualized areas, and the rates are significantly higher than 4%. Back on page 9 of our brief. Non-recovered expense again at 7%, and for this property, based on this capitalization rate study, we think 7.25% is more appropriate. I talked about the surplus lands, and if we just take a look, we saw the picture actually already. The western portion of the lands I would consider to be surplus. I show here a number of industrial land comparables ranging from 2012 up to 2017. If this was to be hived off, if it was possible to hive it off, there would be development costs, the subdivision costs, the dedication to the city to redevelop. So in terms of surplus lands, I've allocated a value of $2 a square foot to our estimated surplus area, and that's just based on a calculation of 109,000 square feet of the site being surplus. So our contributory value indicated from that, $218,000. We've incorporated that into our calculations on page 11. We go through the mathematics, 4% vacancy, 7 non-recoverable, 7.25% cap rate. You'll see there the adjustment at $218,000. That's for the lands. And so we're looking for a reduction to $1,405,000 based on all of that. And I'm open to questions.
Questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Any questions?
Just looking for, oh, I did, okay, thank you. I have no questions.
No, I have no question.
Okay, thank you for that. When did the school division move out?
I'm going to say it might even have been 2017. Certainly by 2018 they were out of here. Subsequent to the appeal hearing, I knew that they were developing the Grassmere site by then, but they were still occupying the premises for the 2018 appeal. On this particular, that's easy for me to say, for this particular property for 2018, we argued the liability issue, and that's pending in the courts. But for 2020, because it's vacant, my view is that that's no longer applicable, and so we're not seeking that on this property.
Thank you. All right, we come to file number 193406, which I understand is vacant land, and class and liability have been withdrawn on this?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So 19, what did I say number was? 193406.
That's right.
Okay, so you can proceed then on quantum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next property is file number 19-3406. Has a roll number 07569067400. We're dealing with the roll year of 2020 using reference date of April 1st, 2018. The assessed value is $397,000. It is a vacant land with a land area of 66,963 square feet. And on page 3 is the aerial photo of the subject property. Those two lands that are split. And on page 4 are some land sale comparables. They're all ranging from $8.32 up to $21.60 per square foot. And right below it is the map of the subject property and comparable land sales. And on page 5 is the land valuation. Land valuation is the area is 66,963 square feet, and the land value of or a net rate of $5.93 per square foot, giving it a land value of $397,000. On page 6 and 7 is the 3-4 decision, and other legislation of preceding pages. And that's my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Questions?
Thank you. I'll start at your page 6, and you've included a copy of the 2018 appeal decision from this board. Are you aware that that decision has been appealed to the municipal board?
No, I'm not.
So if you take a look at your page 4, you'll agree with me that this property is zoned residential, R1M,
Yes, it is.
and you'll agree with me that these lands do not have sewer or water adjacent or available.
The subject or the
Our
contract?
subject?
No, I'm not aware.
Well, it's shown here, if we look under your land influence, see there where it says no sewer, no
Right.
water?
Yeah, that's correct.
So you'll agree with that, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So all of your, let's come at this another way. Your comparables number 1 and 3 are both industrial land sales,
M1, yes.
and they're not residential land sales.
No, they're not.
Similarly, your comparable number 2 is a commercial land sale with
Correct.
some R2. Do you know how much of each there was?
No, I'm not.
Safe to say on Brunel, most of it would be commercial. Yes?
Most likely half and half, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, 301 Brunel is just north of Portage Avenue, right?
Right.
From what used to be on that site?
No, I don't know.
But your 3 comparables would also have sewer and water services readily available to them?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Similarly, they are readily developable.
Yes.
Their location is amenable to immediate development, right?
Yes.
So if we take a look at your page 3, the areas outlined in, I'll call it purple, are what comprise the subject roll number, correct?
Correct.
So they are 2 parcels of land separated by a strip of land in the middle, right?
Yes, correct.
Strip of land in the middle is owned by the city.
I think so.
Okay. And to the left of the left-hand side and to the right of the right-hand side, those are back lanes, right?
Yes, correct.
And so, given the depth of these lots and the back lane access only, is it your view that development would be allowed on these sites as they sit?
I'm not sure what the future is. I don't
Okay.
know.
Do you know where the water and sewer are located?
No, I'm not sure.
Typically down each of the residential streets, right?
Typically.
The sales comparables you've used on page 4, to make them comparable to the subject would require significant downward adjustment, right?
Yes, correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
No, not for the assessor.
Okay.
I have no question.
All right. So you can see with your presentation now.
Okay, and I've gone through essentially what this property is in my questioning of the assessor. We show the location of the property on page 3. These properties abut rear lanes. The land between them isn't within the school division's control, and it's quite clear that certainly there's no sewer and water running down Bruce Street, which they abut, nor is there water and sewer running down the back lane. And so the question then becomes how you service these sites and at what cost. And so we took a look at a number of sales. On page 6. These are all residential lands. They are all bracketing the range of the city's site. I can tell you that a number of these sites more readily accommodate development than the subject lands do. And so looking at the range in here between $1.32 and $3.72, we selected something close to the middle of $2.50 a square foot as an appropriate indication of what these lands would sell for, given the development challenges with their characteristics. No water sewer split, you're not going to be allowed to develop on lands fronting a back lane. So we're looking for a reduction down to $250 a square foot, or a total assessed value of $167,000 based on all of that.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
Questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
No more questions?
Are you aware of the development to the south of this property?
Yeah, once upon a time it was a police station. It's been scraped, and I think there are residences now. And I stand to be corrected, but I believe that's the case.
So in fact, that strip down the middle is actually the allocation for the street? That's where Lyle Street goes through?
Potentially, but you'll also be aware that developers are responsible for covering the cost of the street construction. And based on the size of these lots, my suggestion would be that it would be a very small infill project, which wouldn't support the cost of construction, the running of the sewer and water, the cost of construction of the roadways and the lights. And so my view of it is that it's simply not going to be economically viable given the small size of these sites.
Are you aware of the size of the lots of the development to the south?
I believe they're on the lower side, but I'm not positive.
And are you aware where the street ends?
Not currently.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have no questions.
Questions? So this is off Bruce, going south off Bruce.
It's actually between Bruce and Portage, or halfway. Portage is the
Okay.
south, right?
All right, thank you.
And I didn't influence borders. I do have a short summation on this one.
Okay. Summation then?
Yeah. Just really quickly. The lands are used as a playground for public use. And you see there are soccer fields, and they're still used for that. And so what we have here is a circumstance where the school division is subsidizing, paying money to the city, form of property taxes, to allow the city and others to use it for a playground. So what we've done here is looked at, aside from the development horizon, when you consider the expenses involved in developing these lands, I think that the rate of $2.50 per square foot reasonably reflects what these lands would be worth on the open market. Thank you.
Thank you. So then that concludes today's hearing, so I thank you for your presentations, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.